Today on Inside Utah Politics, Utah's first congressional district. It's an open seat for the first time in 18 years, and a couple of Democratic candidates are hoping to have the chance to flip it. We have a preview of the primary matchup. Plus, the coronavirus pandemic is having a devastating impact on industries across the board, including our nation's farmers. How a plan backed by the White House could help.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. Two candidates are in the running for the Democratic nomination in Utah's first congressional district. One of them is Darren Perry. He joins us now to discuss why he's running for Congress and why he thinks he's the best candidate for the job. Darren, welcome to Inside Utah Politics. Thanks for being here.
Glenn, thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's get right into your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have done throughout life.
Well, thank you. I was born and raised in the 1st District in Syracuse. I'm a local kid. I heard somebody the other day say that they were a 5th generation Utahn. Well, I'm probably a 50 generation Utahn. My background is with the Shoshone Nation. I've been fortunate over the last few years to serve as the chairman of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. And that's significant because it's given me access to local and state officials and federal officials where I've had to navigate those waters that sometimes Native American communities and marginalized communities have to negotiate. So went to Weber State College, graduated from there, raised my family in the 1st District, and just a proud resident of Cache Valley today.
Talk about your qualifications. What do you believe it is that qualifies you for this position in Congress?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I have grown up in the district. I understand from the north to the south and east to the west. I understand rural communities and what are important to them. Also, as a tribal leader, I have great insight as to how the federal government and the state government work. And I've worked closely with all of those officials to make it better for Native American communities throughout this country. So that leadership, my bridge building, being able to bring people together to make a difference for the common good of everyone, I believe are my strengths.
I often hear from members of Congress, not necessarily just from Utah's congressional district, but we see it across the board. There's a lot of frustration of being able to get there and get things done. So what is it that interests you in taking what you have on the table to Washington, D.C. to represent Utah's first congressional district?
Well, you're right. As a country, we seem as divided as ever. And so what I've seen is the political partisanship that exists today. And that's a world I'm not familiar with. And so my background in sitting down with officials that absolutely have different opinions than my Native American communities have had over the years, and being able to negotiate a settlement that's fair for everyone is one of the strengths and what I will take to Washington, D.C. It's not okay anymore to have the divisiveness that we have today. I'm running to bring people together, to build bridges of understanding. It's okay to have disagreements, but it's not okay to not sit down, understand those disagreements, and work together for the common good of the people. And that's what I really want to take back to Washington, D.C.
What do you see as the most pressing issues for the people of Utah's first congressional district over the next 2 years?
Well, a couple of months ago, I would have said climate change and the protection of our public lands, which are still vitally important. But as the pandemic has taught us, what we need to do to make sure that the most vulnerable of our people are protected would be a pressing issue going forward for me. I was able to participate a couple of weeks ago to provide the Navajo Nation, my Navajo brothers and sisters, with just basic living supplies. And so you look at situations like that, you look at our rural communities, you look at the middle class and the class of people that are on the front lines working every day in the service industries, how their lives have been impacted by loss of jobs, no health care. That's a problem, and it's a problem that I want to participate in and
Yeah.
solve.
Let's dig into that a little bit more. You mentioned underserved communities, underrepresented communities, and Navajo Nation, one of the hardest hit areas, in fact, per capita, the hardest hit area in the nation as far as the coronavirus is considered. What's your analysis and assessment of how the federal government has responded to meet the need down on Navajo Nation?
Very, very, very slow. And look, Native American communities all across this country have lived a second-class citizenship life. And so the CARES Act, which a lot of people have received money from, a lot of large businesses received money from, and some small business. Well, up until a week ago, Native communities that were promised $8 billion in funding didn't realize any of that until just really recently. And now, as a tribal leader, we've got this little pot of money, and it comes with a lot of strings attached on how we can spend that, and a deadline to how we can spend that. The Navajo Nation, there are many in the state of Utah that don't have running water or electricity. And in the year 2020, that's not acceptable by any means for anybody. And so the government's been slow, and we really need to do a better job of taking care of those communities that are marginalized.
Darren, you mentioned all the people who've lost their jobs in this situation, hundreds of thousands in Utah, millions across the country. How do you balance the economy and public safety? What are your views on that?
That's a good question, and what I would defer to always for me, look, I'm not that smart of a guy. I think I do okay, but the science matters here. And so to me, we listen to the people that know, and the scientists and the healthcare providers, they're the ones that know. My wife she's a nurse and of 34 years, and she's participating in a research study to help with the COVID-19 crisis on best practices that we may be able to find a cure on. So it's become crystal clear to me that we need to do a better job there.
So let's break it down a little closer to home here in Utah. Are you in approval of the way we are now moving forward and starting to reopen the economy again?
I am, with caution. So everywhere I go, I try to wear a face mask. I try to keep the social distancing. I believe when we hear those reports from Governor Herbert and his health care people that if they're comfortable with that, then I should be. But even then, I have an individual responsibility to myself and those I come in contact with to make sure that I'm doing everything I can within those guidelines to protect myself and my neighbors.
Okay. You mentioned public lands earlier. I want to get more on that because that has been a big issue in Utah's 1st Congressional District. Take about 30 seconds and assess what we've seen from Representative Bishop when it comes to public lands.
Well, I like Rob Bishop, and if you look at his land policies over the first few terms, they were completely different than what they were the last few terms, especially under Obama. And so my plan is threefold. One, it needs to be an open and honest process. It's a process that we need to bring all stakeholders together to make an informed decision. And then the federal land managers who manage those precious resources should work closely with state and local officials to make sure that the plan lines up to what we want to accomplish with our federal guidelines.
Okay, real quick.
And that would be my policy.
We're going to have to end, but real fast, what is your pitch to Democratic primary voters?
This election is not about just bullet points and issues. It's about leadership, and leadership that can bring people to the table that have difference of opinions and can work together with the other party to make a difference.
Okay, we're going to have to end it on that note. Thank you for your time. Appreciate having you with us.
Thank you, Glenn.
After the break, we will be checking in with Jamie Cheek, who is also on the primary ballot. And a little later in the show, the current pandemic has made virtual doctor visits more of the norm. But there's a crucial missing piece, what lawmakers are doing to strengthen the infrastructure. Plus, a former officer on a mission to help parents spot the signs of addiction in teens. What he's doing to make sure the work goes on during the pandemic. Welcome back. We continue our look at the Democratic primary in Utah's 1st Congressional District. Jamie Cheek is also on the ballot, hoping to move on to November. She joins us now to explain why she wants the job and why she says she's the best candidate to represent the party. Jamie, welcome to Inside Utah Politics. Glad to have you with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've done throughout life.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Wyoming, and about 9 years ago I moved here to Utah. I currently live in Ogden with my husband and 3-year-old daughter. I'm employed right now with the Department of Workforce Services and the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation as a district director, which means that I manage $1 million plus budget and supervise over 17 employees. And I think the reason that that's important and why it qualifies me to go to Congress is for 2 reasons. One, I started with my agency at the entry level as a secretary, and I worked my way up while going to school to get my master's degree to become a district director. The second piece is that being that I work for Department of Workforce Services, I see how legislation meets the road and how we're able to implement legislation in a way that helps people. And so understanding that, I think, gives me great insight into how it is that we craft legislation and how it is that we vote for that legislation.
So you moved here to Utah 9 years ago from Wyoming, 2 very red states. You're running as a Democrat. What are the differences, if any, between being a Democrat in Wyoming versus Utah?
Yeah, so Wyoming's, and honestly Utah too, they have that real strong independent streak. And so I think that there's a lot of similarities. The ruralness is really important and making sure that we're talking to those communities and giving them the services that they need. And then that there's kind of the same feeling that we need to talk about family values and those kitchen table issues and really get down to it when they're looking at their candidates. And so they're kind of largely just the same.
So you look at Congress today, there's a lot of partisan fighting, a lot of congressmen and women lament that they're not able to get what they want done in Washington, D.C. So what's your interest in taking your life experience and representing Utah in Congress?
Absolutely. So one of the things I'm really proud of is that we're running a really progressive liberal campaign, which is something that doesn't happen very often here in Utah. And the reason I think that that gives us a step up when we look at partisan politics is because we're fighting for issues that matter to all Utahns. And we know that bipartisanship means that we need to come together and talk about the issues. And so when we compromise, Democrats get a win when we have these more progressive leanings. So when we talk about health care, we don't have to settle and we don't have to give in for the sake of bipartisanship. So I think that that's a unique thing that I have specifically for CD1, but also for most of the candidates here in Utah. And so I think that gives me the ability to come to the table in honesty and have great conversations with my counterparts.
So when you define yourself as running a progressive campaign, what are the most important issues to you?
Absolutely. So I have 3 cornerstones. The first is healthcare. It needs to be more accessible. It needs to be more affordable. I also talk a lot about education. We definitely need to improve it, but also give it as an opportunity for all Americans who want it. And then also we need to clear the air. CD1 has 2 of the top 20 most air polluted cities in the country, and so we need to do something about it, and the best way to do that is to have these conversations in Washington.
A lot of those issues that people are championing are kind of being put to the side right now because we're dealing with a pandemic. Your response to how we've seen lawmakers on the national level deal with the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, so I think that we've definitely had a failure of leadership when it comes to this pandemic. We should have had more testing sooner, and then we also need to make sure that we had access to the PPE materials. We had them stockpiled and weren't really checking them, and so most of them were not in good standing when we needed to use them. So for the future, if this is to happen again, we need to make sure we're giving access to testing, that we have affordable health care for everyone, and that we have the infrastructure to mass produce PPE as needed.
So back to my point a little earlier, how do you as one individual, one congresswoman, go to Washington and get that done? Do what you would want to do in that situation?
Yeah, well, I think it starts by being able to have these conversations. I think with the Democrats, having the House right now, that starts that conversation. I think that we need to be making sure that we're listening to our counterparts and seeing where we can find the middle on those issues. I think for too long we've let the partisan divide determine what it is that we're going to get done. And so we need to move those partisan politics kind of out of the way. And what is it that we can do to actually help Americans?
Do you see that happening, though? Do you see Washington, the two sides coming together to get things done?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable and we have to do it. This partisan divide has put too many people at risk. We have millions of Americans who have lost their health care and lost their jobs. We've shed 20.5 million jobs just since the coronavirus started. So we're going to have to do something different to make a difference.
All right, so in addition to the health side, the public health side of this, there's the economic side. We've seen states across the country kind of take this on in different ways. How do you balance public health versus economic health in this situation?
Yeah, well, I think we need to let the science guide us. We need to be following CDC guidelines. Utah is reopening. We are in that yellow phase right now. And I think that we just need to be making sure that we're following those guidelines, that we're wearing masks as needed, that we're following social distancing, that we're self-checking ourselves to make sure that we're not going into public if we're experiencing any of those symptoms. And that's how we make sure we keep the people safe. And then we start looking at how do we have these jobs, or how do we create these jobs? I work with people with disabilities and we help find them employment, and COVID-19 directly impacted them and furloughed, hundreds of them. And so that's affecting everyone in Utah. So jobs are changing. The world is different now. And so we need to be able to move forward and change what we think about work and how it is that we access the economy in general.
So you're okay with the steps Utah is taking right now, given this careful approach to moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we went from orange to yellow within 2 weeks. I think that we could have taken a little bit more time. Just a couple days ago, we had the most deadliest day here in Utah, and we didn't really wait to see the impact of orange before we moved to yellow. But Governor Herbert has moved us to yellow, so the best that we can do is just, try and be safe within our communities and our families and, do what we can.
Hill Air Force Base, a staple in Utah's 1st Congressional District. Your thoughts of the importance and what you would do regarding Hill Air Force Base if elected?
Yeah, absolutely. Hill Air Force Base is critical to CD1, but also to Utah's military. And so definitely my role would be to protect it. I think that we need to be making sure that they're getting the provisions that they need. Most recently, our Republican counterparts allowed the Trump administration to steal millions of dollars to build a border wall that isn't necessary. As a Democratic representative, I would not let that happen. And then we also need to be making sure that we're focusing on the jobs that are on Hill Air Force Base and, modernizing our military and providing training and providing technology to allow them to be specialized, kind of like the F-35s.
I want to get your take on public lands. Outgoing Representative Rob Bishop, that was a big part of his legacy that he will be leaving. Your thoughts and assessment on how he approached public lands?
Well, public lands absolutely need to be protected at all costs. I think that Rob Bishop pushed for the reduction in barriers by 85%. So as a Democratic representative, I would never advocate for that, and I never would have let that happen.
Okay, real quick, we're running out of time, but I want to give you an opportunity to make your pitch to Democratic voters. Why should they go with you on June 30th?
Absolutely. I'm Jamie Cheek. I'm running to be the first Democratic Congresswoman for Utah's 1st Congressional District. If you believe that healthcare should be accessible and affordable, vote for me. If you think education should be an opportunity for all Americans, vote for me. If you believe the environment is in a climate crisis and we need to do something about it, vote for me. And you can find me on all social media as well as cheek4utah.com.
All right, we're going to have to end on that note. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. Still to come, like many others, America's farmers are struggling, and the White House is backing a plan to provide relief. How it would work after the break. Farmers and ranchers around the country have struggled to make ends meet due to the pandemic, but a new relief program is meant to help many of them get back on their feet. Washington correspondent Basil John reports on why the White House sees this as a necessity.
Tuesday, President Donald Trump announced direct assistance to farmers through the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program.
American farmers, ranchers, and growers feed, fuel, and sustain our nation.
The program provides $16 billion to farmers and ranchers impacted by the pandemic.
They're proud defenders of the American way of life, and I'm proud to stand right by their side.
U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue says this program will help get farmers back on their feet.
They were hurt through their livestock and having to dump milk and other things. That has hurt them, so they'll get direct payments from that perspective.
Starting May 26, the USDA will accept applications from those farmers and ranchers who suffered losses. And Perdue says it won't be long before they receive their assistance.
When they're able to register and sign up at their local FSA offices, that's next Tuesday. We expect the checks to flow within a week to 10 days.
The president and Perdue also point to the Farmers to Families Food Box program, which sends excess produce to families who need food assistance.
People were not going to restaurants, there were no colleges, schools, or other types of things, so half of the consumption in America had to be realigned.
Perdue says both programs are designed to keep farmers in business and the food supply chain working, while states work to restart the nation's economy. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
Officials say there's at least one silver lining to the pandemic, that being it has forced the healthcare industry to rely on telemedicine, expanding access to millions of Americans. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley reports.
So far, the FCC has given out nearly $33 million to almost 100 healthcare systems in 30 states.
We've been very aggressive in getting that funding out the door by evaluating applications, and we've gotten several hundred of them so far.
FCC Chairman Ajit Pai says the grant money from the CARES Act helps healthcare systems establish or expand their telehealth programs.
I think that telehealth is having its moment.
And some say that might actually be an upside of the pandemic. Telehealth not only allows patients to stay out of doctors' offices where they could infect others, it also expands healthcare access into rural areas where options for care might be limited.
And that's going to be critical. We want everybody, whether you're in an urban or rural area, to be able to get healthcare, especially if it's a connected care solution, regardless of the type of situation that your community is facing.
While the FCC decides which programs get the money, Pai says they'll leave it up to each recipient to figure out how to use it.
We want to give them the maximum flexibility to design that telehealth program to serve the patients in the way they see fit.
Pai also wants to roll back some regulations, which he says have limited the expansion of telehealth services. For example,
providing healthcare across state lines. That traditionally has been one of the restrictions on telehealth. It has held back the promise of telehealth.
The grants are issued on a rolling basis, with more expected to be approved in the coming weeks. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
A retired narcotics officer who normally tours the country educating parents about teen drug addiction says the pandemic can stop him from traveling, but not from educating. Washington correspondent Alexandra Limon reports.
Joseph Abdallah, a retired narcotics officer and executive director of Code 3 Association, says signs of drug abuse can be found in all sorts of ordinary items.
And we'll open up to reveal a compartment inside.
Abdallah travels the country with a mobile replica of a teen's bedroom to teach parents how to spot the signs of drug abuse. But the pandemic pushed Abdallah's course online to rallyusa.org.
I've spoken with a lot of parents, and they say that if they would have had this before their child became addicted, maybe they could have saved their child.
Abdallah says families who have lost teens to drug addiction later found clues they'd missed, like tiny pieces of plastic in their vacuum cleaner.
Same premise as a sandwich bag, but when it's going to be used, the illicit powder in there, the top is either ripped off or the teeth are torn off.
Experts say if you suspect addiction, there are many reasons professional help is essential.
The risk of overdose and the risk of death, it's one thing to read numbers and statistics. It's another thing to actually administer Narcan.
Josiah Haken works with New York City Relief, helping people with addiction.
The stakes are too high to be avoidant and sort of dismissive.
For more free tools to spot the signs of addiction and what to do about it, you can visit rallyusa.org. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Stay with us. We'll have more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The primary election is coming up next month, and it will be conducted mostly by mail due to the coronavirus. Watch for ballots to arrive at your home the week of June 9th. The voter registration deadline is June 19th, and Election Day is Tuesday, June 30th. Next week on this show, we'll be checking in with the candidates in the 4th District Republican primary. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.